Thank you, Jonathan. That was very, very interesting, and there's so much to cover. And as I've said to you today and yesterday, I don't know if about 30 minutes is enough time for us, but we'll do our best. So welcome to the stage. Bristlecone time. I love this. Let's dive right in, because you just mentioned new ways in which we can approach urban planning and governance more broadly, and that's what we're here to talk about. We're at the World Government Summit. So how would you advise governments and policymakers to really put this into practice? How does it look using your philosophical provocations in practice?
I think that this really needs to be addressed at several levels. One is the practice of philosophy, which I believe is a practice that is open to all and essential for everybody. I studied philosophy in college and then fled academia because philosophy seemed far too important for philosophers, for professional philosophers, that is, and seemed to be far too specialized and focused on narrow problems that were ultimately becoming narrower as the academic pursuit of philosophy continued along its course. I think that public philosophy is something very different, and that I've attempted to do on my own, but that I think if people in government do this work for themselves and collectively, that this can be a way in which to kind of start this process that is one of individual and collective introspection, that's one that can lead to surprising answers to problems that are in desperate need of very different approaches than what we're accustomed to. So one part of it is for everybody to become a philosopher. And I think that's easier done than said. The other is, I think, for us to think about how these thought experiments are prototypes. We're prototyping tomorrow. These are alternative realities that could become models for the reality that we collectively create. And I believe that we need to collectively consider a multiplicity of possibilities in order to be able to come to consensus about which of these is the one that we would like to obtain. So I would say that it would be a very bad idea to take what I do too seriously on one level, which is to say, this is ready to go. We're all going to go onto river time, and the clock that we're watching right now as we're speaking is going to be calibrated by the rivers, and so is everything else, and what could possibly go wrong? That, to me, doesn't seem like a very good idea. On the other hand, it seems to me that by positing this, it then allows us to experience it in a way that we can then figure out on that basis what actually might work. And what might work might be very different in terms of the technology, in terms of the design in the broadest sense of the word, but that I'm very motivated personally that whatever it is that we ultimately end up doing, that we recognize that we are a part of nature and that we reintegrate into this living system of planet Earth. And whether time ultimately is the mechanism for doing so, let alone time as effectively an appropriation of the clock that we know and the abuse of that clock in terms of using it in ways that manifestly the clock was not designed for. That, to me, is a way to begin that work that we need to be able to do. And it needs to happen in public. So I think that we need to build a clock for people to be able to experience, not for people to be obligated to follow at the outset, but as a way in which we can start to orient and we can start to then potentially translate some of these thought experiments in some form, probably very different from anything that I could imagine, into some reality that maybe is going to be useful to people in a more practical level.
So interesting. And one of the in your exhibition, the most fascinating one to me was the River Time project. And if you haven't seen it, it's just by the Media Village. It's a beautiful exhibition, just really really interesting, and I would definitely recommend it. The River Time project, which I loved, and we saw together earlier today. It kind of observes the pace of life. You have people going to their rivers in places where they live, and you're hoping to bring it to many different places. I suggested we do it here in Dubai with the oceans, and I live here. I'm a big fan of our beautiful oceans here and across the country. But what can we learn from these observations when it comes to kind of governance? I think what you've said to me is governments need to incorporate this longer term perspective. What can we learn from something like the River Time project, and how can we apply it to governments?
So I think that in the first place, we as humans are very limited in our experience of the world because of our culture, because of our biology, because of our technology. And that we need to enlarge the view of the planet and planetary conditions in order to be able to make good decisions that are decisions that are ultimately going to affect all life on the planet, including ourselves. So I think that maybe as a very simple proposition at the outset would be to say that we need to start looking to other life forms and living systems in terms of how they're living in the world. Not to look at them as probes in some sort of way that we objectify them, but to think about them in their living state as participants in the decision-making process alongside us through their manifestly different ways in which they live in the world. Their manifestly different ways in which they sense and process their environment, because each and every species evolved in different conditions and therefore is going to be sensitive to different aspects of the environment and is going to process what is experienced in different ways. That's just a matter of survival in different environments that now we as humans are controlling or attempting to control. We effectively are trying to control it all. If we're going to exert the power that we have responsibly, we need to do so responsively, where we are able to take in what these other organisms and living systems are experiencing. And that means that we need to be observant of them and deeply respectful of them. And to me, that really is a matter of what we bring into the legislative chamber or into the government as a matter of what we can learn and what we can know and who we can engage. But I think it's also a matter of getting out there into the world. I wonder whether state houses really should continue to be the place where we meet to make these decisions, or rather whether we should think about going out into the open. There's this idea of cognition that is known as extended cognition, which is basically to say that we process the world, we make sense of the world not only inside our heads, but in a way that is also extended out into the world. So we learn math by counting on our fingers. It's a very simple way in which to think about this. But I think that there's a much broader way in which we need to think about it, which is to say that we think with others. We think with all these other life forms and living systems, or we have done so in the past and we need to do so now. And the fact is that as we degrade all of these environmental systems, we actually lose a lot of that cognitive capacity. We're literally losing our minds. So I think that what we need to be doing is getting out there and engaging and including and making that the foundation for the ideas that we develop, for the decisions that we make.
So interesting. You reference losing our minds. I learned something really interesting about you, and I want to talk about it because I'm amazed by this. So Jonathon does not use a smartphone, and I know this has been publicized and spoken about before, so I'm not kind of breaking news here. And I was so impressed. I'm a journalist. I'm addicted to my phone. I have a smartwatch. I'm speaking to you looking at my iPad. I think this is amazing, and I completely commend it. Do you think that these devices that we're using, these iPads, all of this, you say we're losing our minds. Is this why? Because we have just developed this technology that we rely on so much, and this is actually kind of making us not able to function as a society in the way that we should?
I think that it's a really good question and an important question, especially to be asking in a place that really is at the cutting edge, where technology is very much a part of the culture. And so for the record, I've never owned a smartphone, but I've actually never owned any phone at all, a cell phone.
He has a landline if you need to reach him.
I do have a landline.
I said to him, if you want to call me, you just know where my number is. And he was like, well, you can't call me. You have to email me. And I said, you are brilliant.
The landline, the cord doesn't reach across continents, I've discovered. So the landline is kind of useless while I'm here. So having said that, I am not a Luddite. I am not against technology, but I am of the opinion that we need to use technology in ways that are essential to our way of being in this world, that actually deepen our experience of this world through the enhancements that they can provide, and also to be aware of the ways in which they can distort and even can degrade. To me, there's nothing new about the smartphone. The hand axe has been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and that is actually a more impressive technology in a lot of ways. And that continuum, technologically speaking, and also we find more and more tool use by non-human species, that technology is not uniquely a human phenomenon. We need to look at technology in that expansive sense to recognize that in the same way that there is extended cognition, there also is the fact of our technologies being an extension of our bodies. But it's a matter of what kind of body we want ultimately to have and how we want that body to live. So when we think about a technology such as a smartphone, my concern is that my mother might call me when I would rather not answer the phone, but we won't tell her that. My concern is that I have all too much information available, and therefore I don't really consider that information or reflect upon that information sufficiently. And this is a matter of memory. I think that we can only have the only chance we have of being able to make good decisions in the present about the future is to do so through reflection. Reflection is only possible where the memories are inside our heads, where those memories are available to us, and what we're observing is in relation to what we have experienced. And memory has become cheap in every sense of the word. Memory is something that you can buy, and you can put your memories in the cloud, and you can forget about it. So I think that the ways in which computation and the ways in which technology more broadly provide shortcuts, that this can be incredibly beneficial. I mean, I got here on an airplane. I'm very happy to live in a house. All of these are good things. I'm not giving them up. But I think that also we really need to be very much aware of them, and we need to be able to live with them as a part of us, rather than with us as a part of them.
Relying on them too much. I know I do. So it's my new goal. You've inspired me to maybe put the phone down, maybe for like an hour a day. I want to talk about this amazing camera that we have here, and you mentioned it briefly in your speech at the beginning. I think about this when I think about something like climate change, and the UAE hosting COP last year has been at the forefront of this and of really making sure that we set our next generations up for a world that still exists and that is not warming. It's one of the greatest challenges we've faced. And you have this amazing project where we can actually conceptualize how climate change actually looks in human terms. How can we use this amazing tool to kind of understand humanity and understand ourselves better as humans, and the challenges that we face?
Well, again, I'll talk about technology, and I'll talk about technology in terms of how good we have gotten at changing things. The leverage that we have, the power that we have attained since the Industrial Revolution is extraordinary. We can change most anything in ways that will be felt, that will be experienced over hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of years. And that is a remarkable feat that comes with a remarkable level of responsibility that we don't have, because all of this is very new. Since the Industrial Revolution, we have not really evolved in any meaningful way. I'm speaking about evolution in the biological sense. Our brains have not changed. Our minds have not changed in a way that we are able to wield these technologies responsibly, to wield them in a way that is at the level of the technologies themselves in terms of what they can do. So I've been thinking about ways in which we can recognize the long-term impact of our actions, and we can interact at some level with those who will be impacted in a way that can lead to a sort of a feedback mechanism, or a means of reflecting on the present from the perspective of the far future. So cameras that have an exposure time of 100 years, and I've also built cameras with an exposure time of 1,000 years. These cameras are out in the world where we can encounter them, and we can imagine the image, a single image, very slowly fading into black paper at the back of this capsule. An image that we can imagine, but we cannot see. But in the ability to imagine it, we can imagine what those in the far future might see.
What do you think they'll say when they see us?
Well, will they see us, I guess, is the first question.
Right.
I am not pessimistic, but I don't know the answer to that. Nor do I know the answer even if I take the view that the camera will last that long and that people in the far future will be able to see the picture. I think that from my perspective, it is the uncertainty that is the significant part of it, rather than any certainty that I could try to persuade you of that I wouldn't be convinced of myself. I think that it's a matter of how we can enter into this state of uncertainty that is not a state of resignation, but rather is an active form of uncertainty, a form of not knowing that is constantly taking in whatever we can experience and constantly considering what might be and working toward what of all those possibilities, what we consider to be desirable, but at the same time not predicting what is going to be seen by those in the far future. So that the image that they will see is always in this state of uncertainty until that very last moment. And the fact that it's in this state of uncertainty is an opportunity for us today and through time to change the picture. It's an opportunity for us to time travel in our minds to the far future, to look back upon ourselves from their vantage. But we're not there, we're here. In the here and now, we can do things that can make what we imagine people in the far future might see, what we would want them to see. So for me to make predictions would actually, I think, be antithetical in a way to my motivations for for this project. I very much hope that by having many of these cameras in many places in dialogue with each other, effectively a network of these cameras around the world, and ideally Dubai will be the next location, that these cameras can be a way in which we can, each one of us, in terms of these places as we encounter them, undertake this process of reflection. But we can do so in a communal sense with others we encounter at the point where we see the camera, and with a larger community, which is the planetary community, which is to say all the other cameras in relation to this camera, and the conversation about this larger picture, this planetary image that is in a state of becoming.
So interesting. I'd love to see this project in Dubai. And to me, even I've lived here for over 5 years and I've seen this country change so much, and that's not very long actually in this country's history. But when you come here and you see a place like Dubai, a city like Dubai, and you see its growth, do you think there's lessons that we could learn in the West? You live in San Francisco. I think this all the time. There's so many lessons we can take from Dubai and their philosophy of actually looking to the future, serving future generations, that I think we can learn, especially in our home country of the United States.
I think that the way in which in Dubai opportunity is the first word that comes to mind when people talk about the future, I think that is an incredibly positive and really important way in which to think about the world we live in, because opportunity is in fact something that comes with certain obligations. It comes with the responsibility to use that opportunity well. It comes with recognition of agency, and it comes with a sense of possibility that is truly expansive, and therefore that can take in a realm that lies beyond what has ever been before and what anyone ever thought was possible. But that also, because it might actually come to pass, needs to be taken very seriously. It needs to be taken at the level of seriousness that is not only taking into account ourselves, but also everyone else, all other beings, all other species, everyone else, all future generations. So that, to me, is what, at an abstract level, I see when I look at Dubai. In terms of what I've seen on the ground here, I haven't been here long enough. I hope to be here much more. I hope to really be able to experience this place. I think that it is a place that is, because of all that is being created here, there is this sense of creativity that is really exciting to me, that is almost in the way that when you look at a tree, you see the growth potential of that tree. I think that there is that kind of energy, and here I'm starting to sound woo-woo, I don't mean it that way, but a certain sort of energy that is apparent to me that I would be delighted and honored to continue to engage in, and that I am deeply honored to have had the opportunity to begin to engage in by way of our conversation and the larger conversation through the Edge of Government and the World Government Summit.
We are honored to have you in Dubai. I don't speak for Dubai, but I live here, so I'm going to say we're honored to have you in Dubai. Let's talk about alternative intelligence, and this is one of your provocations. And everyone at this summit is kind of discussing a different kind of AI, but we won't talk about that here. We're going to talk about your provocation specifically, which is kind of, and you talked about this in your speech just before, gleaning a kind of alternative intelligence policy advice from a perhaps microorganism. And this is in your exhibition as well. It's really interesting. It took a little time for me to get my head around this because it is complex, but you've challenged me today, and we're going to challenge our audience here as well. Slime writing, which I learned is perhaps the next biological computer. Tell us how governments can use these as models. I learned a little bit about urban planning, but tell me some more how we can look at these models and this slime writing for our future in government.
So slime, slime mold has been engaged for computation in a number of cases already, some of which are on display at the Edge of Government. And part of what is so exciting to me about the Edge of Government as an exhibition, I should say, is that these cases are present in relation to my provocations in a way that grounds the provocations, and I hope also leads us, when we see those cases, to ask what else and how those can be the beginning of so much more. In the case of slime mold, I started to engage with slime mold because I learned about some work by Andrew Adamatsky, a professor at the University of Bristol, who has worked with slime molds, placing oats in a petri dish where major cities are, and then watching how the slime mold grows to be able to feed on all of those oats. And where the amount of oat in a given place, by the way, slime molds love oats. Tip for anybody who wants to get on the good side of a slime mold. So the oats are put in places that the cities are, and the slime mold spreads. So it's a single superorganism, a blob. The blob spreads in a way that looks a lot like the highway system. So from that work by a computer scientist, it became apparent to me immediately that slime molds are doing something really remarkable. But to me, it isn't only a matter of how slime molds can be urban planners or can be civil engineers. We have plenty of civil engineers, and we have more than enough highways. My thought is that we can look to slime molds in terms of other questions by virtue of the fact that what they're doing is not civil engineering, but they are in fact making, they're computing optima in highly complex ways, which is to say they're doing the work of an economist. And they're doing so in a way that is recognizable to us and yet is manifestly different, and that leads potentially to insights that we would not be able to reach on our own. So instead of having the slime mold show us that in fact we got the US highway system right, or we could move that highway over there by a few inches, instead to say, here are some intractable problems, some problems that we don't know how to address, trade-offs of various kinds. And slime molds are very good at working out trade-offs if we model our problems in their world, in the petri dish, using effectively a language that makes sense to them, which is to say, we think about how they experience the world, nutrients, risks, rewards, so toxins, all these various factors can be controlled, and we can observe what the slime mold does given the conditions that we set up. And that can provide us with policy advice at a direct level, and also at an indirect level. It can lead us to a recognition of the limitations of our own minds. And by seeing our blind spots, we can then, I think, learn to take a broader view. That broader view, I believe, needs to involve other creatures, other species. But that broader view, regardless, needs to be one that comes out of a recognition of all these other ways of knowing that are out there amidst us, that are highly adapted to the planet in the past, and that can potentially adaptively lead us toward a future that we can all get along.
All get along. So I'll ask you one more question, even though I have so many more for you, Jonathan. This has been so engaging. Slime molds maybe can't solve the problems of today. We live in such a fractured world. What would you say as somebody who is a philosopher, somebody who looks at things a little differently, not like our policymakers? How would you tell the world today, as fractured as it is, to come together?
Well, I guess I'm going to crib what I said earlier, which is humility, intellectual humility, humility of every kind, which is antithetical to philosophy by and large, which is part of my problem with philosophy as practiced professionally. I think that what we need to do as a way in which to be able to get along, as a way in which to be able to make our way in this world, is to recognize that in spite of the fact that we hold all the power, we don't, in fact, hold all the power. We hold very little in the long term, and we need, with what little power we have, to do whatever we can to give that power back to all the others who, as a matter of justice as well as a matter of pragmatism, need to be a part of what we're doing and how we're thinking. So it really is a matter of, through humility, looking beyond ourselves in order to be able to see within ourselves our true potential. Because our true potential is enormous, but our true potential is actually not the potential of what we could build, what we could make, but is a potential of how we can be in community with all other beings.
Brilliant. Jonathon Keats, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.